Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by John Culver, the co-founder and CEO of Fanvest Wagering Exchange. John, thank you very much for coming on.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Betfair Australia. No matter where you are in the world, if you're looking to find your edge in sports betting or racing, you'll need to visit the Betfair Hub. From analysis to betting psychology, it has everything that you need. Simply visit betfair.com.au/hub.
Today I'm joined by John Culver, the co-founder and CEO of Fanvest Wagering Exchange. John, thank you very much for coming on.
Hey, Jake. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I'm excited to chat with you today about your business, obviously the co-founder and CEO of Fanvest, and the tagline is the stock market of sports. So before we get stuck into some of the products and what you're planning here in 2020, why don't you just tell me a little bit about yourself and what drives someone like yourself in this day and age, in this regulatory legal environment, to start something like this?
Absolutely. So for me, I came from a background in sort of finance and investing in private banking. And I've long been a sports fan and played some fantasy sports. And about 7 years ago, I started kind of experimenting with some of the tools and techniques I would use in sort of my previous life of being in finance and investing. And I started kind of applying them a little bit to try to get an edge in fantasy sports, seeing how I could do some things with from value investing and bring them into, drafting players sort of from a more, strategic standpoint, and how to kind of think about managing teams. And that evolved as I kind of found some success in doing that, into seeing what I could do in the sports betting world in terms of trying to kind of really have a deep and clear understanding of how those betting markets worked and how to kind of find value. And over time, I had a lot of fun with it and really learned a lot, but I kind of had concluded that, there really ought to be a better way to kind of invest in sports because, as fun as fantasy and betting can be, both of them at the end of the day kind of really feature few winners and a lot of losing. And of course, there's a lot of other elements that, go into the experience. But I really wanted to create kind of a new system that would borrow from investing and kind of trading and really kind of a marketplace and a marketplace experience outside of these kind of two traditional avenues in fantasy and sports betting. So kind of what ensued over time was building a kind of self-contained marketplace. And I said, this could really work. And I think there's a lot of people out there like me who might like something sort of in between here as a new way to kind of monetize, your sports knowledge. And I had that kind of fire in my gut. And I said, I think the timing's ripe. And there was a lot of movement. This was all kind of pre-PASBA. But I said, the data was there. And I really kind of was thinking, imagining this world where sports betting was legalized and there was a lot more kind of opportunities and innovation. And I thought, hey, if I don't take this chance now, I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life. So I quit my job and started getting connected with the right folks to learn what I needed to do to start implementing the vision.
So pre-PASBA falling back in May 2018, tell us a little bit about what it took for you to go from finance to quit the job, to get stuck into, obviously back then, you're probably talking about fantasy, maybe daily fantasy along the way, sports betting, and obviously Nevada, but outside of that was limited to nothing in the US. It probably wasn't an easy thing to do, and we might think of things in today's current environment here in the US, but back then, pre-PASBA, it was certainly not the same.
No, I felt very much kind of like a man on an island for a while, because the idea for the Fanvest Wagering Exchange really kind of crystallized in the fall of 2017, so months before PASBA. But once I really had kind of built this model, originally it was for the NFL, and it was something that was a little more complex than what we're kind of rolling with today. But I had been able to kind of back test these models that really mimic the underlying performance of these NFL teams. And I thought, okay, this is going to happen, and this is the kind of risk I need to take, and I need to get out in front of this, as this was something I was really thinking about. So I talked to a lot of people who told me I was crazy, but I just felt that it was more likely than not based on all the kind of legal opinions I was reading and sort of these bill trackers in different states, and also looking at kind of like public opinion and seeing how a lot of the polling data suggested that gambling, which often historically here in the States had kind of been frowned upon. There was really a public sentiment change where the majority of Americans now had a positive opinion of gambling, and just sort of thinking as sort of the secret that was wide out in the open about how many people actually gambled illicitly in the States. And so I kind of made two bets, as I say. I thought it was more likely than not that PASPA would be repealed based on this sort of growing sort of trend that I believe was taking place here, and also just the permeation of sort of betting data and analytics data into all kinds of sports media. And then the other bet was that I had enough of what it takes to go out, find the right people to help instruct me and help build this product, and that I was willing to kind of give up and sacrifice everything for the opportunity, being comfortable with the idea of failure, but not being comfortable with the idea of not even trying. And I figured, hey, the private banking job, finance, these other jobs kind of climbing up the corporate ladder wasn't really for me. But if things don't work out, that job will always be there, but this opportunity won't.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's very, very admirable and courageous. And many people probably sitting in their comfortable finance chairs or other industry chairs, making a decent salary, wondering what if and thinking if they could have done what you did. So it's always cool to see someone take the leap. And one question around your experience prior to Fanvest. You were talking a bit before about building some models and back testing, and my feeling or sense is that having some experience on the player side, and what I mean by that is playing DFS or betting sports for a while or betting horse racing, is really helpful in understanding and thinking through, not only from a problem-solving perspective, given sports and horse racing and whatever else is that oftentimes, but just from building a company, building the personnel, having the ability to talk through some of the issues that ultimately your consumers are going to face. Do you think that's been of benefit for you as you've gone through this journey?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question and great point. I feel fortunate that there's sort of this, great intersection between a lot of my interests and passions that also help, I think, prepare me for the opportunity or give me a certain degree of confidence to undertake this opportunity. And for one, as part of kind of before even I was in private banking and the investment side, I was at kind of a small sort of investment firm. And that was sort of like a lot of my informal business education, where we would just study companies, learn about all their industries, learn about how, to value them kind of in isolation. And I learned a lot about, business that way and really enjoyed that kind of process. And then having been a consumer of fantasy sports and just sports growing up my whole life, and then just being able to bring in these kind of aspects of like how I saw the value of like really kind of efficient markets and being able to recognize or realize value over time, and wanting to be able to kind of create a system that would reward players, in the long term for their sports kind of like acumen. And I think the other thing is like having a real, I guess, kind of wonky interest in probability had a really, really big impact on me. So when I would look into kind of the fundamentals of sort of sports betting, understanding how, juice and VIGs were calculated, and looking at kind of on a real sort of, quantitative side of the math of this kind of stuff, what the actual return on investment would be from an investment perspective. I kind of saw a pretty bleak picture in terms of, how your wallet gets impacted over time, even if you are, a really sharp bettor, looking at what those margins look like and the kind of discipline, if you're in it for the money, which, most people are to an extent. There's also a lot of fun involved there. But I thought, these experiences like fantasy and sports betting should still exist, and our success isn't contingent on people quitting those activities. But that another way to kind of invest in sports had to exist. And our longer term vision for that way is going to really bring in the kind of the power of markets. I really don't think traditional betting kind of lends itself sort of structurally to the way that a whole new different system would otherwise, provide. And so ultimately all of these things, including just sort of my real interest in sort of trying to find this kind of creative way to do this, certainly were instrumental. And I think thinking about this opportunity and then trying to kind of realize it.
So before we jump into some of the products, the innovation, and what you're trying to build now, I'm interested in your perspective on the current US marketplace. And that obviously includes free-to-play fantasy leagues, now daily fantasy in recent years, and obviously sports betting more recently again. From a high level, or if you were advising one of your finance or previous finance colleagues who wanted to jump into this marketplace and try and make a living, how does it make you feel on the consumer side? Is it something that you're excited about? Is it something that you think is ripe for innovation? Just tell us your high level thoughts.
Yeah. I'd say it kind of answered from twofold. I'd say first on the kind of consumer side, I think kind of the post-PASPA world is fantastic. And this is something I didn't mention earlier when kind of asked about it, but it's also a boon for states to be able to, help their coffers out by taxing this. That's something that so many people engage in. But from a consumer standpoint, I think by being able to bet on all kinds of games and outcomes, at price points that are, run the whole spectrum from, big money bettors to just like sort of what I call micro bettors and these sort of exchanges or things that concepts like that, like, Prop Swap or other companies out there. I think it really enhances the fan experience. And it's something that I think also can be done in a way that doesn't, blow a hole through people's wallets. And so I think it's fantastic, this kind of opportunity in the post-PASPA world, along with, the work leading up to this, that DraftKings and FanDuel here really help pave the way, I think, also from a regulatory standpoint, and kind of carving out a different sort of niche of this sort of game of skill, game of luck dichotomy, which is something that we are really going to be leveraging in the future. I think the kind of growth of these ways for fans to kind of get involved and have this fun sort of gamified experience with sports and find ways to make money off it is fantastic. On the business side, again, I think it's great to have all of this sort of exposure and sort of attention in the space. What I found is that there seems to be somewhat of a paucity of innovation in the whole sports betting world. And what I mean by that is that really there's this kind of race that's been going on. I call it sort of a little bit like the Wild West of trying to acquire as many new users as possible by sports books. And what I noticed is that those costs were getting quite high in terms of acquisition costs. And I didn't know how sustainable that was. I understand that, there's value in these things, but there really seemed to be a lot of demand to kind of innovate and create different experiences outside of traditional gambling. And that's an area that I think is really important. It's obviously what we're trying to do. There are a few other companies that I've seen have been trying to do this. And I think as people kind of get saturated with gambling, there are a lot of problems that exist in sort of the operations of gambling. For one, I mean, it's quite complicated when you actually try to unpack it. And there are a lot of like pretty expensive transaction costs that the consumer has to undergo with it. And creating something that's a little bit more transparent, a little bit more intuitive in some ways, we really think that can be a great opportunity. And we're trying to kind of see the power of markets that I think millennials have really embraced when you look at the popularity, kind of going back to finance and products like Acorns and Robinhood and StockX, the shoe exchange. There's a real kind of democratization force of having an exchange, a marketplace, where supply and demand can help really set price in a way that these other products still feature, like daily fantasy and traditional gambling, this house versus the player element that will persist. And so I think that might be something that becomes challenging folks to sustain. And for some users, once your average person, their wallet only goes so deep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on. Just tell me the moment when you probably had quit your job, you'd done some research, you'd spoken to a number of people, like you said earlier, you were seeking a marketplace experience for what you wanted to create. Was there a moment where it all clicked and the vision came together, or has it been a brick by brick approach for you?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So I kind of it's more of like kind of if you picture a graph, it's a kind of a lot of highs and lows. It's sort of like a randomized stock chart, I would say would be the emotional ride and also the kind of conviction ride, but it's trending up. But it's one of these things that sort of bounces around at different points. So I distinctly remember where I was, here at my desk in my apartment when I finally had in November of 2017 when I kind of crystallized this idea and said, oh yeah, this can work because this model is intuitive and it does feature like real predictive, like kind of statistical data of these teams. And there's a logic here. And I was like, this is going to be fantastic. But I knew that there was a lot I didn't know. And that was one of the kind of key things. And I think pretty quickly, a few months before we incorporated in the spring of 2018, I realized that this was going to be a technology company first. And at the time, I couldn't tell you what a full stack developer did versus a front end or back end or design. And so I knew very quickly again that I had to find somebody who could be kind of my tech interlocutor. And I fortunately got connected through a mutual friend who's somebody who became a really good friend who's now an advisor to the company, and Kash Duna, and he lives in Singapore right now. But he really became the person who could translate all these ideas from all these spreadsheets into a kind of technological reality and how to think about evaluating talent and what kind of tech stack we would need. And so that's kind of like a part of the example of like, there's so many sort of points where you get that new information. Once you get that person, you get them to buy in, there's this other big, kind of boost. And then you find out, okay, there are a lot of other things we need on some of the regulatory side. So it's this kind of constant, adjustment period, but it's trending upwards, and the big picture ideas start to come together. And there are all these kind of ups and downs, but each new thing I'd say is more of a brick by brick. But the big picture vision for what we want to do has always been there. The time and the speed at which we get to all those things, it's a lot more challenging sometimes than you hear reported for a lot of businesses in this kind of romanticized startup experience.
So you mentioned spring of 18, I think you were incorporated and obviously working throughout 2019. Take us through the mind of a CEO in this space, obviously a highly regulated, legal patchwork scenario, working through products. Tell us from your perspective, are you looking to run to the finish line, launch with a bang? Are you trying to get the core product stable and functional? Are you trying to have a lot of features in the beginning? Tell us a little bit about your mindset and how you approach it.
Sure. So again, this is also kind of great question along these lines. I'll answer that kind of twofold. One, the person I got connected to before Kash, our technical advisor, was a lawyer. And we started talking again in the fall after the idea crystallized of 2017. And knowing that my long-term vision for the business was going to at some point intersect with the sort of securities regulators like SEC, FINRA, and potentially CFTC. And coming from my background in finance, I knew that those groups did not mess around. So like moving fast and breaking things and the kind of the Facebook sort of adage was not going to be a prudent course of action for us. I knew we had to be very, very deliberate and thoughtful in executing like a smart business evolution and legal strategy that would leverage the kind of existing infrastructure today in terms of what is free and what we can run with and how legal certain operations are and how we can adjust them in the short term. And from each phase of the business, how that sort of framework might change. And so that was one of the greatest sort of expenditures of both time and capital, was a lot of kind of legal work where I was able to leverage a lot of what I knew from a lot of the kind of securities law and how to think about some of these things, along with speaking with our legal team at Goodwin Procter. And then the other kind of aspect when it looks at the product, I call it kind of creative friction. And that to me is the difference between the time and speed of which I can kind of bring my full vision of the product to market and the realities of the law, talent, resources, and capital and time that constantly create this friction between the two. And so from that standpoint, originally in fall of 2019, we were looking at, debuting our first sort of beta products for the NFL season. And originally I thought that we were going to be charging kind of in a daily fantasy type fee-based structure, but we quickly kind of, realized that we needed to kind of, one, create a really wide funnel for our users, and two, everything we do with our product is proprietary. So all the back end, all the front end, all of this design was going to require a lot of like specialized work, and that we knew that it was going to take time to start kind of getting the product to where we really wanted it to be. And during this time, we had to sort of be very patient, take feedback in, and constantly work with our users to try to implement the best product possible before we even thought about charging anybody for it. And so that's part of it. And then also keeping the products as accessible as possible in the beginning. Debuting with kind of our more complicated sports, derivative products wouldn't be really a great way to start. We want to kind of create from the ground up. And so that's why we've envisioned this sort of 3-phase business model, where we're in our kind of the final stretches of our phase 1 or beta, which is our completely free to play products. And each of these products has been improved upon from the previous product based on user input, collaboration, how we think the product should go. And then we're delivering these things through a kind of a weekly, a season long, and a contest format, which all feature different pricing for different sports. And then we'll be moving into our phase 2 and phase 3. So it's a lot of kind of compromise. And then you're constantly kind of confronted with new information, new obstacles. And so constantly being able to adjust to that new information dynamically is absolutely needs to be part of our DNA, and it has been. And it's why we're still here, even though we're being very patient. We haven't charged anything yet. I've been unpaid, and I've sunk everything into this company because I just believe completely in its vision.
So I want to get your thoughts on how you're feeling today. And if we go back to, working in finance, working probably within marketplaces, you talked about value investing and how that relates to drafting fantasy players, to building, the vision in your mind and then building it out through 2018, 2019. With all that background, how do you feel now as the CEO with, you spoke then just about phase 1, 2, 3 and potentially really launching this to market. What's your mindset at the moment?
At the moment, it's really excitement. And I say that, with the caveat of, where we are in the world right now, and with the kind of global anxiety and obviously catastrophe caused by this pandemic. And so that's something that affects all of us, psychologically, physically, families. There's so much uncertainty in the world. So the excitement is on the product, but I'd be lying to you if I didn't feel some of these forces and also, the sentiment about, what's going on out there. But kind of tying into what I said before, the amount of problems, we don't have enough time to go through some of these obstacles that I am positive are not unique to me and my experience and my team. But when we constantly have been confronted with obstacles, our mentality has always been kind of, how do we fix it? What's our next move? If we didn't have that kind of mentality, we would be absolutely devastated and crushed at multiple points. That would not allow us to kind of continue to evolve and grow. And so for us, the moment for me is, we've been building this March Madness Portfolio Challenge product as kind of our most complete beta product yet. And we started doing a lot of design and development on that in January while our NFL postseason product was out. I was able to successfully, raise some more capital to help kind of optimize this process. And I do have to say, and get a moment to get into it, none of this would be possible without the incredible buy-in by my team, from my co-founder and head of product, Fern Murius, to our chief engineer, and Vinny, who has just been invaluable in working with us and sacrificing so much of their time and resources to kind of make this vision possible, along with our advisors and Lloyd Danzig and our social media help and Colton. And so we've just had this incredible team. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention too our our financial advisor, CPA, and Jay Wang, who's been fantastic. So with all of this kind of buy-in, we were able to kind of make quick decisions. And so once the NBA season was suspended by Adam Silver, I think it was about maybe 10 days ago, about now, the reality started to dawn on me, the plausibility of March Madness getting suspended. And then 3 days later, last Thursday, that news came, and obviously that, affected the morale of the team. But I was just sort of walking, and interestingly enough, my fiance suggested, why don't you simulate it? And at first I thought, that's not a bad idea. I don't think that's not gonna really, I don't know. So I took this really long walk, and I was thinking about everything and thinking about how we fix it, what we do, what the world will look like for the next few months or beyond. And then my co-founder Fern called and said, why don't we simulate this thing? I said, you know what? You're the second person who said that, and I actually think that's not a bad idea. And so we quickly kind of got together, started brainstorming, talked to Vinny, our chief engineer, and we basically said, from a technical standpoint, here's what we need to do, this, that, and that. And we had been also talking to a really talented data scientist who we weren't sure yet. We knew we wanted to kind of bring him on to the team. He had reached out to us, and he had a really impressive background. We weren't really sure if the timing was right. Like we cover, we get a lot of data and analytics, but we knew that his value would be unquestionably, realized in time, but we didn't know if his value could be realized in the short term. And Fern, my co-founder, and I, we had a couple competing models that we were thinking about, because we were looking at, putting in something that had to be consumer friendly as well. It's not just something that would, a few of us who like some of these technical models would enjoy, but we wanted to make sure this consumer experience could be fun and accessible. And sure, lo and behold, this timing worked out beautifully. So, Kellen, who's been just incredible, help with the model. And we quickly said, all right, let's do this. Let's make all the changes we need to do. And, we worked all through the night, and we ended up coming up with this simulated beta, and which we debuted today. And we really believe that this is going to be the future for the short term. And who knows much how long, but I was just so proud of this. And I think being able to adapt dynamically like this is something that a lot of kind of the older operators might struggle with, and trying to fill this void and capture on the popularity of esports in kind of a hybrid for us now.
Yeah, I have no doubt. So can you just tell us, from a consumer or end user perspective, what can they expect? What are they going to experience? What involvement are they going to have? And how's that going to look without March Madness?
Totally. So obviously, I'll talk about kind of the March Madness components. One, on Selection Sunday, we never got a kind of complete bracket, right? That never happened because the NCAA, I think, for good reason, decided to suspend the tournament. So the first thing was kind of like, hey, how do we get the 64 teams we want that are going to be participants in this? And we've been actually kind of tracking, fortunately, some of that information. A website called teamsports.com has some great data, and they always have a pretty solid March Madness feature where they kind of show their estimated probabilities of teams making the tournament. And we actually been using that because we were designing all the new assets to kind of show all the team logos and all the stuff that would be going into the product. So we kind of went with that, randomized a few things, released our kind of 64 teams. And so we had our teams that were going to be part of the collection. We put them in a bracket that people can view who signed up. We also have that on our social media. But the next step was really wanting to preserve the kind of randomness and fun that exists in March Madness. And randomness in just terms of results, but probabilistically not make it so, random where everything is a coin flip. We wanted to preserve the fact that, the difference in the strength of teams and everything. So it was very important that our prediction engine that we leveraged, that uses all the team kind of data for each team for the matchups, could simulate all these games. And so we have this little process, which we're going to, explain to our users in an email, but we've run like 10,000 simulations on all these matchups. And when I do this game preview for the first round, which starts tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, the March 21st, I will not know the results of these simulations because we're going to do a 10,001 will be that extra simulation will be the result that we use as kind of the game results for our product. And that's going to be kind of a fun element to play with where the results are blind for me writing into it. And the simulation will produce final scores as well as box scores, even down to the player level. So shooting statistics, assists, steals, rebounds, as if you're really looking up, something on Sports Reference about this box score. So all of our users will get to see this stuff, which we'll be sharing on social media as we go through. And then also we'll have these kind of game summaries at the end. So kind of preserving that element of March Madness, the kind of the crazy, mad parts that happen was something that was super important to us in simulating this and trying to kind of create as much of a semblance of the whole process without being able to actually watch or simulate or view those kind of games. So that's going to be part of the fun that we're really proud of being able to preserve. And I'll tell you about the product overview really quickly. So it's free to play. Everybody who comes and signs up, they get 10,000 fan bucks. And so fan bucks are kind of our monopoly money or our fictitious currency. And you use your fan bucks to invest in teams. And one of the best things I think about this product is unlike kind of a March Madness bracket, which is just static, once you've filled it out, our product allows people to invest in teams and then to reallocate in between rounds. So you can invest in a few teams that you feel are going to advance in the first round. Then you can reallocate your fan bucks or your portfolio with each round as the tournament goes on. You might like certain matchups differently. So there's a far more active role the sports fan gets to play. And our scoring is a little bit different too. So the name of the game basically is to maximize what we call your total gain. And the way you do that is you maximize the amount of teams that you invest who win in advance. And very simply, you take the margin of victory of the team. So we're going to be simulating all these games. You'll see the final scores. And you multiply that margin of victory by the amount of shares you have. And that gets banked for your total gain. So if you invested in Kansas and Kansas wins by 10 points, you invested 10 shares, you bank 100 fan bucks going to your total gain. And so you do that with all your teams. Now, if you invest in losers, that's going to eat into your total gain the same way. But that is how everybody's kind of ranked on our leaderboard. And that's how that will go through the whole tournament. And then you can also kind of form private groups through our parties product, which is part of the website. So you can compete against friends and family, your buddies, whatever you'd like to do in kind of a private group and sort of compete for bragging rights there.
Interesting. I'm just trying to run through in my mind how that would look. So I'm guessing the time span will be the same as typical March Madness, and it'll just be simulated at the time of those games as if they were?
Yeah, so we're running the March Madness is going to end next Sunday. So it starts this Saturday and it's going to end next Sunday at 6 p.m. And we have the full schedule, and we're going to kind of also just share it through emails as sort of our best way to kind of communicate, because we are a mobile-friendly web app. So we're deliberately right now not in the App Store, but you can access us through desktop or mobile, and it's coded that way. So the experience is preserved for mobile as it is for desktop. But with each game, like quote unquote tipping, within 1 hour of every game played, we're going to update on our platform the final score. And we'll have those box scores available as well on social media, and then they'll be summarized with our email. And so the first two rounds we put on one day. So round one is on Saturday. Round two is going to be on Sunday. And then we've broken apart the next sort of rounds a little bit through next week, going all the way to the championship game being next Sunday. But there is that kind of hour break between when a game tips and when the results are in. And then we've staggered that schedule throughout the course of the day.
Yeah.
So there's, a little bit of lag time. Wouldn't it be very fun if we just said, all right, fill this stuff out, and we're going to press one button and then it's all over here. We want to kind of create this experience, and we'll be kind of pumping out content and emails and, hopefully creating something of a, distraction for a lot of people too, because, hey, you can only watch so much Netflix during this whole thing, we think. And I think there's a real hunger for sports out there and a real openness to trying different things as we're trying to do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't mind, can you indulge us for a moment on what we can expect in 2021 around this time? Obviously, people will probably be filling out their typical brackets. They'll probably be having a bet or two with a sports book potentially. But what about from your perspective? What's their other alternative that you're going to be able to offer them thinking ahead 12 months?
So the best kind of comparable from a like business standpoint and then consumer standpoint is sort of like a DFS contest. Let's say it's $20 to play. And we will, by the way, have cash prizes on this platform here for people to win by the end of the tournament. But in this case, we'd have much higher cash prizes. You would get, $20, you'd get 10,000 fan bucks. And again, this portfolio experience of being able to reallocate in between rounds and to be able to trade kind of between rounds really allows, you, the player who maybe likes betting on one game, you can allocate all of your fan bucks, let's say in the first round onto a number one seed that you really like. And you can really kind of create this whole new strategy throughout the tournament of how you might want to reallocate each round and how you want to kind of maximize those returns in a way that a bracket would not allow you to do because it's static. And also in a way that, individual bets, while certainly can be a fun way to do that, don't allow you to kind of give you the same sort of diversification that this platform would be without having to pay like a commission or a vig every time you're doing that. And so you can really kind of take that strategy to another level where if you're pairing this experience with a bracket and a sports book, you can make certain spread bets, or you can use the betting market, for example, as a good sort of like futures market for our product. So you could look at the spreads, for example, of let's say some games in the round of 32, and you could compare them basically and say, which ones do I think are more accurate? Do I think the team's going to win by more or less? The same kind of approaches that you would take into that, you could also hedge in our market by looking at how you want to invest. Or you could use it as a good proxy when you kind of think about predicting the kind of total gain you can earn each round. So there's this kind of fun interplay that borrows from both of those experiences and also lends itself to be able to kind of leverage from those experiences and both in this direction and in terms of towards Fanvest and also looking at somebody wants to take some of this information here and look at a sports book.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely that crossover and gleaning information from Fanvest to use outside of Fanvest or vice versa with the betting market. So projecting out to other sports or other structures, obviously it seems perfectly set up for tournament style, March Madness style offerings, but what about a season of NFL, a season of baseball? Tell us, projecting out what you expect on those types.
Definitely. So very simply, this is exactly what you said. This is sort of like if we offer our products through these three types, contest or tournament being one, weekly is another, and then season long. This is our kind of most basic sort of vanilla product, but it's really fun for tournaments. The Masters is another thing that something like this would work for. And for this, one thing I'd add is also that the initial team pricing is based on all the seeds' historical win percentage in the tournament in fan bucks. So like number one seeds are 79 fan bucks per share because number one seeds win about 79% of the games they play in the tournament, all the way down to your 16 seeds, which are less than 1%, win historical win rate. So they're at 1 fan buck per share. And each round as the tournament progresses, the price per share of the advancing team goes up by their margin of victory. So it gets more and more costly to reallocate or invest in teams as the tournament progresses. So that's just another kind of strategy element that'll be there. But even looking at kind of this season, knock on wood, that everything goes okay and we have an NFL season, we are going to be debuting our first season long product. And that is, again, something that we're really excited about. We've already built it. We've designed most of it actually last year. We just held off on releasing it. But that one is a little bit more, I'd say, analytical, a little bit more technical, different pricing than our weekly game, which will also be a part of it. But very simply, the way the season long product works is we have an initial team offering period before the season. And that's all 32 NFL teams. Again, this is all on FanBucks. And this initial team offering, or an ITO, is based on the team's average points per game from the previous season. And so you can go ahead and invest before the season starts. But during the season, prices for all these teams will adjust based on this proprietary formula we have based on the team's underlying performance. So if we go back to kind of like a stock market analogy, think of each Sunday or Monday or Thursday, depending on when the team plays, as kind of like an earnings call for the team. And based on primarily, did the team win or lose, the margin of victory or defeat, that will be fed into this proprietary price adjustment we have each Sunday. So you as the player basically can sit down, and we have this toolkit where we've designed for everybody. You can sit down and you can value all these teams by looking at all of their future schedules. And you can use our model, or you can put in your own estimates of how you think the team will do. So you can fill out the score each week, or just what the margin of victory or defeat each week, or just whatever average number you want to put in. And we've got a toolkit that our users will have access to that will spit out these kind of different values in the future of what based on your kind of estimates. So it's a really kind of fun, interactive way to kind of invest with a longer time horizon and be able to adjust that investment in a way that a futures bet does not allow you to do. And, betting the money line every week is a good way to lose money. So this is something that really kind of preserves that and creates this kind of reward for people who have a longer term horizon and are patient with certain teams that they think will realize value over the course of the season. So we're so excited about that. And then our weekly game, very simply, is every week the prices reset and the prices trade like projected scores. And this was part of our beta last year. And sim goal, holds is that you want to invest in teams you think are going to win by the greatest margin of victory. But we also have an underdog factor in our weekly game that rewards, investing in underdogs who win by adding a multiplier to that. And that has cash prizes every week based on that total gain loss performance. And our season long has massive cash prizes based on total return on the portfolio. So again, it's this kind of different experience, but we have most of that infrastructure has already been built, like I said, and we're just super excited to be able to debut that.
It seems to me, or at least a question on the expectation for user base, there is the simplicity to be, taking something rather complex and, you said you're a technology company first, trying to essentially put together all the pieces to make it simple enough for the average sports fan, but also it contains that complexity for those that might be looking at more serious ways to invest, let's say. Do you expect to have a broad user base?
Yeah, it's one of this is going to be a function of, honestly, a lot of the capital and the timing of the capital for our reach that I think we are capable of. So we've run all of our digital marketing in-house on a shoestring budget, and we've been really fortunate to have incredibly low acquisition costs per sign up. And part of that has been because I think really Fern, our co-founder and head of product, and I really actually mirror our two kind of customer avatars, where for me, I'm kind of more of the sort of financial services professional avatar first, enjoys some fantasy sports, has a more technical or quantitative approach to sports gambling. And then Fern is sort of the daily fantasy, year-round, sports bettor, year-round person first, sports fan, who also has some sort of strategies and technical, approaches. And so being able to kind of share what we think are kind of our two primary avatars, we have been able to really kind of, I think, resonate with our audiences and be able to kind of leverage our experiences and really push that through in our digital marketing. And the opportunity to have a massive kind of user base, and we've been incredibly happy with the results we've been able to generate, on, let's say, about $32,000 in lifetime digital spend. We've had, about, I think, 7,500 signups. And so that's just something at a really low, cost per acquisition. At right now, the average is $4.33. which is quite low, which gives us a lot of confidence about the ability to do some serious reach, where we've gotten folks from actually Google's startup team is eager to kind of work with us once we have the right amount of capital for them to allocate for us and to be able to kind of leverage Google's tools. And also we've got some talks with SiriusXM, a couple channels there to hit, CNBC, Bloomberg, as well as Fantasy. So for us, we really believe that there is, and our data suggests that there is real demand for this. And what we're looking more, as opposed to the kind of the top line number of users, we're looking to find our weekly active users, our super users, and to learn a lot and kind of interact with them. And those are the people that this product's ultimately for. And because it's not going to be for everybody, but the same way that take a company like Robinhood has created this really fun, intuitive experience. And that's something that a company that we really sort of idolize and look up to in a lot of ways. A lot of people talk about their success being a function of lowering commission costs to zero. I think that's the headline, but the reality, in my opinion, is their brilliant design and customer experience and their ability to demystify the investment process and all these charts and noise that kind of existed on more professional, products and apps. Told millennials who maybe had never invested before that this doesn't need to be rocket scientists and that it can be fun. Rocket science, and it can be fun. And that's something that we want to have, is preserve the opportunity to have like first-time sports fans who maybe don't play fantasy, don't bet, but because we want to keep it fun at the team level for some of our products, that it can be sufficient if they're just a Seahawks fan and they like them. And if the Seahawks do well, all else being equal, they should do well on our platform. And that kind of also is there on Robinhood. Hedge funds are there along with the first-time investor who has a few $100s who decides that they like Apple products. And again, all else being equal, they buy Apple stock and time. If Apple does well, the stock price ought to appreciate. Again, all else being equal. But it's one of these things that we think is really important. And one of the challenges, I'd say, is always trying to think about the customer first and have this sort of circular logic between that and the product and how the product is explained. And that's one of these things that we're always trying to kind of recalibrate, but try to make it as accessible as possible while also creating this separate experience for, again, we predict fewer people will gravitate towards some of the more analytical products, but something that we want to offer to cater to everybody.
So one final question before I get more details from you on those interested in participating in the March Madness simulation. This might be more of an entrepreneur question than anything else, but is there anything over the journey that you would like to have gone back and changed or adjusted based on what you know now, whether it's time or cost or other resource allocation, that bugs you to today? Or has it just been many ups, many downs, and you've been able to ride the wave?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, in the sense of course, there's always things that we wish could be done differently in retrospect. But one of the things that I try to discuss frequently and with my team is to really have a kind of systems-based decision architecture for everything. And which is to say, like in betting, if you're do some of the math for it, we've all heard, I think all your better listeners know expected value. And that is the way we like to make kind of all of our decisions. And just as you can kind of have the, probably make the right bet based on the math or based on certain data, but the outcome can be different. That doesn't mean that you were wrong. Sometimes if you have, if I flip a fair coin, and I ask you to guess what it is, you say heads, and it comes out tails. You weren't wrong in terms of you had an equal chance of being either. It just turned out that was tails. So that's not to say we don't make mistakes, but we try to not be biased by the outcome and try to always make sure that the decision process was logical, was thoughtful, based on the information we had at that time. So if we can look back in retrospect and say, these outcomes were not the outcomes we wanted, but given the information we had, the resources, because we're always dealing with extreme scarcity of one resource or the other, and we're all up against time, that is something that I can feel all of the discomfort from the ups and downs, and there are many, but I personally don't have a lot of rear view mirror kind of anxiety about the decisions we made at those times. I actually think a lot of these experiences have really helped us grow immensely. And we're constantly learning from things that we maybe could be doing differently, but it's also trying to evaluate all those things based on the information we had at the time and how we reached that decision. If that's not trying to be a kind of a BS answer to that, but that's really truly like, I don't know at different points in time with how I would have had access to all the information that I think could have helped. And then really there's just so much to learn and grow. So I think it's a big process, but man, I mean, you have to really, in my opinion, be willing to kind of sink everything, all of your time, and to keep getting off the floor when you're knocked down. And without that, would have folded up after a few months.
I think it's certainly sage advice for everyone in all fields to have that process-driven approach and systematic thought process, and obviously the outcomes are going to be the outcomes. But just finally, before I let you go, tell us how people can be involved in the March Madness simulation, the best way to go about that, and where they can find you.
Absolutely. So Fanvest, wageringexchange.com. You can sign up now, free to play. Our full website is out, and you can navigate the full site on desktop or on mobile. You also can start inviting friends, family, colleagues, whomever, through our private parties. We have these private little groups called our party section. So if you want to invite friends and family to compete, you can also earn more fan bucks by referring friends who sign up using your unique referral code. And there's a referral portal that you'll see, and also being able to, you can click on your dashboard and to get on, the mailing list when you sign up. Also, I'd recommend following us on Twitter at FanvestWX, and also on Instagram at Fanvest Wagering Exchange, and LinkedIn. But on Instagram and Twitter primarily, and Instagram and Facebook, we're also going to be kind of providing more information, box scores, updates, as well as our emails will be a really great source, I think, of some strategy and some discussion and complete game reviews. But FanvestWageringExchange.com, sign up and start, building your portfolio. All the first round teams are available to purchase with your fan bucks. And basically, you want to get invested for this first round, at least, for the first games before they tip at 12 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, March 21st. And our first game is between number 1 seeded Kansas and 16 seeded Robert Morris.
There you go. Perfect. Thank you very much, John. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, and I hope everyone gets a chance to engage with the simulation and hopefully many more real games to come.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jake. I've really appreciated the opportunity to chat with you, and hope everybody also does well and staying safe. And we work together to continue to innovate and try to fill the void left by the suspension of sports.